Well, we're looking at day 14 on Eric's 1962 Chevy pickup. Yesterday we got our engine set up a little bit more with our valve springs, seals, and everything, and we spent most of the day climbing underneath here and grinding and grinding and grinding. Today I just don't have the energy to climb up underneath that thing again. So we're going to spend the day doing body work, which is just a little bit cleaner. This is just wax and tar remover. Okay, this is acetone. We have to keep our Bondo board and our spreader really clean. If you get any little fragments of hardened Bondo in there, it'll put streaks in there and it'll cause more problems way down the road. After you've used your sanding pads for a couple of times, then the glue kind of gums up on there and stuff, so you want to clean it off with acetone every once in a while and make sure that there's no little mountains of sticky stuff underneath. And give it quite a bit of time to dry too, because the pad won't stick onto here if it's still wet. We don't want to grind any grease or dirt into our paint, so the first thing we do before we sand or anything is clean it all off. And when you clean your cleanest areas first and do your dirtiest areas last. This way you won't get a bunch of junk on the rag and then spread it all around. Also, on your rag, you go ahead and you use one side of it until it gets a little mucked up, then you flip it over and you use the other side. And then you just keep unfolding and folding, always finding the newer, cleanest pad available. And save your old rags. They'll dry out and then you can use them for spilled oil or something like that. But don't use it back on your bodywork, that's for sure. Now our ultimate game is making it as straight as possible. So before I start doing any more, laying any Bondo down or anything, I'll get a little bit of a sandpaper and I'll do a little last sanding to see where my high spots and low spots are. So the paint that I shot on there before, I just put that on there to keep it from rusting. I didn't get expensive paint or anything like that. If I'm going to be leaving it longer, a year or two before I can paint it, then I'll use more expensive paint, but I don't need to on this. So anyway, I'm going to grind this paint off and then I'm going to lay down a filler and stuff like that. Okay, when it comes down to masks, those little white ones, they're just bunkus. The filament inside will tickle you and they'll get wet and sweaty and they're just a drag. Just go get yourself a painter's mask. They're like 20 bucks. You use one for body work, you buy another one for paint. It's a lot cheaper than lung cancer. Now, all the areas that I'm going to be laying Bondo in, I can have deep scratches in that. But if I'm not going to be laying filler in here, I don't want deep scratches here. If I have deep scratches underneath when I shoot my primer on and such, in the future when everything starts to dry, then the deep scratches can phantom up later. Matter of fact, 99% of your body work is in paranoia of what might happen a year or two down the line. So we're seeking to hide all our defects as deep as possible, and any metal that's up on top we don't want to gouge badly. So I'm just going to be using a jitterbug with 80 grit to get off some of the other areas. So a shiner is any place that's shining. Any place that's not, that's a divot. So any place that we got a divot, we want to fill with some filler. Filler likes to stick to bare metal, and it likes to stick to 36 grit, 40 grit scratches. So down in all of my low spots, I'll get me some nice 30 grit scratches in there. But again, on any of my nice flat even spices, I don't really want to do that. Now, I do not want any dust where I'm about to put my filler, because of course the filler is not going to stick onto dust. So clean the area off good. We got some nice 30 grit scratches for that bondo to hold on to, and now we'll mix up some filler. Also on the sander here, you can see that I've got an air trap in there. You always want to do that before your sander, because sooner or later water will start spittling out the back. It'll typically have a little bit of grease in it from the air compressor, and then you just jacked up your paint job. So put these in front of everything you've got that's in front of your paint job. After your bondo hardener has been sitting for a while, it gets all goobered up. So just do this a little bit, and then it'll mix it up all around. So I'm mixing up your filler. It generally goes about like this. Maybe I put a little bit too much in this time. If you put in too much hardener, it will dry too quickly, and then you'll waste your bondo. If you don't put enough hardener in, then it'll take forever to dry, and it's more likely to crack on you later. Now, laying your bondo down, incidentally, this is how I stir it up. I'm just going like this. The reason that we're doing it like that is that we are trying to squeeze out any air bubbles that might be in there. Air bubbles are bad. So we're just going to get a little bit on the filler board like this. Spread it out. Now immediately clean the bondo board after, because that's when it's all nice and soft and it's easiest to clean. Once it dries, of course, it's going to be a lot tougher. And again, any little fragment of dried up bondo is going to put streaks when you lay it down. And you've got a couple of different ways of doing this. If you're just trying to do something quick, then you would just put a lot of bondo on and you try to sand it down the first time and it'd be ready for paint, and that's it. But it's generally not your best way to do it. Typically what happens is that you've got, let's say, a little ding underneath there. And if I were just to put one layer of filler on there and then it shrank later on, it can kind of show up. So if I can do it in layers, then it's kind of like a plywood effect. And then if this layer that's down on the very bottom shrinks up too much or distorts or cracks or something like that, then hopefully it won't transfer up through the other layers of the filler. Also, if you had a fender that had a lot of different dings all in the same spot, you don't really want little patches everywhere, because when you paint it, those little patches can show up. So you take care of the little dings, and then you try to have a nice thin skin coat over all of the damaged area. But the more uniform and even and complete the exterior of the final layer of filler that's on there, then the better it's going to be for you. So this is going to take me some time to dry up. While I'm waiting for it to dry up, I'll start on the tip here. If you remember, that got a little dented up. Okay, so again, I'm going to just lightly sand it, and I'm going to look for my high-low spots and work those out until I just can't stand to do it anymore. The longer the bondo board, also, the straighter it'll be. If you're really getting crazy about stuff, I have a 3-foot long block sander that I use on hoods and different things like that, and might even use in a place like this if I'm doing a upper echelon job. But you always start with your longest sandboard first, and then you just work your way down. No matter how well you clean up, this stuff's going to get everywhere, so clean up really well. Also, when you're spreading your Bondo, the last bit of it gets all hot, dried and chunky monkey and stuff, and you're not going to be able to lay it smooth over whatever you're laying it over. I call that slag Bondo, slag filler. So what I like to do is figure out where I'm going to put that before I put the Bondo on. So in the case of this right here, I'm not going to be doing body work on the back side of the fender, but when you do the welding and stuff, sometimes you get little pits in there, so I just put the slag in there to fill any pits. Just do that until you can't stand doing no more. So this Bondo's here is actually dry enough to mess with right now, but I like to really let it dry up hard. It's harder to sand that way, but if you start messing with it when it's still too wet, then it can pull off a lot easier. So harder is generally better. So if you go on the YouTube channel, my YouTube channel, you'll see Gary's 1956 Ford pickup. This is his leftover Bondo, so thanks to Gary. So make sure you get your color really nice and consistent. If you have any streaks of the original Bondo or the hardener, then it's just going to mess up on you later. So nice and mixed. when I'm laying this filler on, I'm actually pushing down on it and pressing it on for two reasons. One, so that we make sure it sticks really well, and two, so that we squeeze out any air bubbles that are in there. Air bubbles can come back to haunt you in the future as little pinholes and stuff. So I press it in, and then you can see I overlap, and then I can come back and I can smooth this out a little bit more if I want. But I'll kind of like when you're painting, you know, you overlap each stroke so that you get excellent coverage. So it started to harden up on me just as I was finishing. You can tailor how much hardener you put in there. If it's hot outside, you put in less. If it's cold outside, you put on more. So this time, it hardened before I could use it, and I basically wasted all of that amount right there. So a little bit less hardened next time. Also, when spreading your filler, do your large areas first. Don't work on your little nooks and crannies, because your bond was drying that whole time. So hit your large mass, then mess with your little stuff. Okay, so a couple of words about filler. I like using this stuff here. It's the Extreme Rage Gold. You have to make sure that it's the extreme, and you have to make sure that it's the gold. This stuff runs 50 bucks a gallon. You can get the stuff that's like about 20 bucks a gallon, and it seems to me the difference between the more expensive fillers and the less expensive fillers is the size of the particulate in here, how big the little grains of filler are made of. The thinner, the smaller they are, they seem to lay out smoother, get less air bubbles and things like that. The bigger and fatter they are, then the filler tends to be a bit more marshmallowy, and it doesn't really lay down smooth. It doesn't even out as well, and you get a bit more air bubbles in there and stuff. So whether you're going to use this or not versus the inexpensive stuff just basically depends on how much money you got and what degree of truck you're doing. If you're just going to build it to crash it, there's no sense in using expensive filler, but if you're going to use it and keep it, then it's pretty common that when on like an edge of a door or a fender, when you put the filler on and it folds over, you want to make sure that that really folds over and connects on there. Otherwise it just kind of gets a little bit of a gap in there, and it can chip off easier in the future or be visible if you don't treat it right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to shoot a fog coat on there. You don't want to shoot a fog coat on anything until you're getting ready to do your sanding on it. The reason being is that if I was to shoot a fog coat on here and then it got scratched or dinged up, it may not be visible when I sand down. Also, when we're doing that, you can get inexpensive, like 99-cent paint, and shoot it on here as your fog coat when you're just doing your 80 grit style sanding. But it tends to plug up your sandpaper a little bit more. So I generally like to go with a little bit higher quality primer so that it doesn't gum up the works. So this first sand is going to be a bit aggressive. That's about it. Alright, so that's what that looks like now. So what I'm doing with this is I'm sanding it just a little bit deeper than if it would be totally straight. Now let's say, for instance, you put your Bondo on here and you still had a pretty big divot in right here. Now if you were just to put a little bit of filler on there and just have it right there where that one little divot is, that might come back up and haunt you in the past. So if we fill in all of these deep little pits right here, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a skim coat on here, and then when I get done, hopefully that whole thing will cover this really nice and even, and we won't have old Bondo and new Bondo showing kind of a zebra effect. We don't want that. We want a nice, smooth, uniform thing everywhere. And that's what that looks like. So if you have holes that are for trim or whatever, make sure you drill them back out each time, because you'll lose them after a while. It's tougher to find them. And now what I'll do is, if I had any pits in this, I'd fix those little pits first, and then I'd go over with a skim coat. That's going to be my final shot, but I don't have that in this, so we'll just put a final thin skim coat on this and let it set up. Another thing I like to do is put some 80 grit scratches in the direction that I'll be laying my Bondo board, or spreading the Bondo out. The reason being is that, let's say for instance I had some scratches going this way, and then I was going to spread the filler over this way. Sometimes those scratches will cause air bubbles and turbulence, and you won't get as smooth of a fitment. But if you get your scratches going this way and you put your filler in this way, then everything flows nice and even. Now normally you don't want to do any hammering after you've got your filler laid on, because it can cause it to crack. You can only get away with that if the filler is quite a bit away from the ding, or if the filler is extremely thin. Now the way I'm showing you how to do all this stuff is kind of the quickie way. Normally I don't use jitterbugs and stuff like that. I'll typically sand everything by hand, but that's when I'm doing a gloss job and we got $1 million for the paint job and things like that, because of course that's going to take more time if you do everything by hand. So this is just a nice simple way to do it if we're just doing a nice decent daily driver. Still going to be really sharp. So let's say you got a deep hole there and there's a lot of pits. It's not a big deal. You just keep putting more Bondo on and then sanding it down. Unless it's too deep, of course, then you're going to want to just grind it all out and pull it out. But if you get little pits and air bubbles and scratches and stuff like that, just keep fixing those minor things until it's nice and smooth, and then do your final coat. For this larger area, I'll be using a larger sanding block. Okay, so right here I can see I've got some low spots that are a little bit deeper down than I like. So I'm just going to work just these areas here, just put a little slip Bondo in those areas. I'll get all of these things nice and even, the basic gist of this whole deal nice and even, and then I'll put on the final skim coat. So if I am going to tap down a few high spots, I'll use the pointy end of this hammer